Okay.
Got that go. You son of a bitch.
Yeah. Son of bitch.
Son of beach. All right, cool.
All right.
So, Eli, we're here taking some photographs of Leaves, your expander, and it sounds like people are finally catching on that there's more it can connect to than just Tree, which is your awesome sequential switch, but you've designed it so it can connect to an extremely popular module, Tom Whitwell's Turing machine.
Yeah. The Leaves hooks up to any module that has a Turing machine expander, which is one of the reasons why I actually went with an expansion protocol that already exists. I wanted people to be able to use it in a wide variety of applications. I wanted it to work with modules where the bits can be on or off, either one at a time or all on or all off at the same time, and then they just add together. And in that way, it works similarly to the voltages expander that the Turing machine originally came with, but has sort of moved beyond. I feel like not just the fact that it's commercially available, unlike a lot of the Turing machine expanders, but also the fact that it has the multiple outputs, which refer to different ranges of the sliders, gives it a lot of utility compared to the normal, the older Turing machine expanders.
So what are some ways that people can use this in their actual patch? Or what are some applications for somebody who might be not as familiar with sequential switches or the expander ports on a Turing machine?
Yeah. So, I mean, the obvious choice for using Leaves is to do voltage, like sequencing for notes and for pitches with it. There's the last output adds whichever sliders are active, sort of weighted by their slidiness, from left to right. Mm-hmm. If a slider is to the left, then that step is essentially off. As you move the slider right, the step is going to be added to the final output, and then all 8 of the sliders come to this last output on the right. So that would be, if one slider was on at a time, that would give you a normal voltage sequence where it's just stepping through each step. The cool thing about both the Turing machine, in this case we're using MNIS, which uses a similar shift register algorithm as the Turing machine, or we also have VERT here, which is converting a voltage to an 8-step sequence using an analog to digital converter. The cool thing about these is that more than one step can be on at once. And so all of the active steps are added together, right? And so that makes it so that not only do you get this voltage output, which has all of these different possibilities, but in these cases, you actually get 3 other voltage outputs, which are based on the sum of all of the steps that are active in the range for each voltage output. So like the top 4 sliders go to this first output, the middle 4 sliders go to the second output, the bottom 4 sliders go to the third output. And each one has its own transpose input. So that makes it, I kind of did that even with Tree, where only one step is active at a time. It makes it so that you get sort of modulation voltage sequencing for free, right? So you have an 8-step sequence that's generating 4 sequences. And in that way you can have it controlling different parts of your patch that you don't necessarily want to be going completely haywire all the time. Maybe just every once in a while you would like to modulate a certain thing, right? Because in modular sense, it's really tempting to just plug every single modulation destination that you have in your case into something that sends out a signal. But in a lot of cases, less is more.
Yeah, and you can go overboard.
You can definitely get this sort of like seasick synthesizer, synth puke that happens when you just have everything going crazy, right? It's better to just like focus on one thing that's going crazy or have a little bit of changes to everything. And so the Leaves expander makes it really easy to have slight variations on a couple of different things at the same time as you're changing your voltage sequence. You're also changing the modulation sequences that are going to these other sources.
That's really smart. it definitely takes, it almost looks straightforward, but then there's much more depth to it than just a simple 8-step sequencer.
Yeah, I think that the flexibility of the Turing machine kind of inspired me to want to make it so that this voltage sequence doesn't just work with one device. I think that the ability to have more than one step on at a time was kind of eye-opening for me, and that I have ideas for other expanders. I would like them to be useful with more than one step at a time in order to sort of keep with that design philosophy.
Okay. So right now we're obviously sending 2 clocks into MNIST, right? You've got one running into clock, one running into the data, so that runs it. But you have your own module that could be running this. We're just showing this for interoperability purposes.
So there's tree, there's the expansion port in the back, and the thing about tree is that it's a sequential switch with 1 in, 8 out, or 8 in, 1 out. But the idea behind that is that I wanted it to be able to run the leaves expander as a normal voltage sequencer. So it only ever has one step active at a time. And that makes it so that if you are sending it just a normal clock, it's stepping through the sliders on leaves. Maybe you have multiple leaves tied together, so you have multiple sort of lanes of sequencing. But tree itself only ever has one step on at a time, right? So I could have designed leaves so that it just switched between all of the different sliders because it was only designed to work with tree, right? But instead, I felt like it was important to use the protocol that was already out there, being the Turing machine protocol, because I think that it's way more interesting to have one expander be able to fit all of these different sort of uses, right?
It's almost sub-modular, where you don't even realize that there are connections happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it would be nice if you were able to change what it was connect. If I could take this leaves and also connect it to the vert or whatever, without having to redo the whole thing. But I think that would maybe defeat the purpose. I don't know. I think at the very least it would require some thought about how to make that as useful as possible. But for now, I'm happy enough to have an expansion port in the back where I don't have to connect all the 8 steps together. Yeah. I think that it certainly comes in handy in my own music. I generally have 2 to 4 leaves in my system. I have the performer there, which I use a lot for gate sequencing, but not as much for note sequencing, because I like to have the really hands-on control for the actual melody. And even just being 8 steps, there's a lot of ways to sort of like coax more than 8 steps out of it. Yeah. And so I use that a lot for, even if I have like a 16-step sequence that's coming out of performer, right, a voltage sequence that's making the notes, I can run that into leaves and have leaves transpose it or something like that. So
yeah, I think that it's obvious that a philosophy behind your design is that people are building instruments here, and that they need to be played and interacted with.
Yeah. I personally, I'm not opposed to modules that have a lot of menus or whatever, but I personally like to be able to see what's going on really easily in the system, and that the more screens and menus I have to go through, the less of like a overall, like a bird's eye view that I'm able to get when I'm performing. So to me, leaves, not only with having the sliders, I could have had the plastic knobs and possibly made it a little smaller or cheaper, but the sliders, I think, give you a really easy, especially when they're lit up, give you a really easy way to identify what the sort of overall shape of your sequence is. Mm-hmm. But also, like, them all being the same color means that if I'm working with tree, where the colors all match to the tree, I'm able to be like, okay, the snare is happening on the green step, right? And so that gives me a really easy way to be like, I'm going to patch out of the green step if I want this other trigger to be happening on the same step as the snare, right? And then, I don't know, it gives you a sort of way to really easily identify, first of all, which step in your sequence you're on, but also like across modules, have there be some coordination to it.
Yeah, visual feedback is so important, right? And I wouldn't call it subtle visual feedback, but not making it something that you need to analyze too much. Just something quick. That you can say, as you said, your example. Hey, snares on the green.
Sure.
Set.
It's similar with IDUM, right? It's like all of the actual modes are sort of identified by their color. And so you could say, rotate mode, or you could just say the green mode, right?
Yeah.
And to me, I think that the color is very underutilized in Eurorack. There's like a lot of information that can be conveyed through the color of a device. Just look at Platts has the different, imagine if it only had one of those banks of oscillators. Instead, it has three.
Yeah.
Right? I think that there's a lot that can be done with color that is just, we just haven't gotten there yet.
Well, right behind Tree right now, there's a module that takes color pretty far when it comes to UX and UI with the quad drum.
The quad drum?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, if you sit there and you actually take a look at the interface, like, I can't say that I understand all the really deep, gritty details of it, but I've gotten pretty far with just the normal functionality of the quad drum.
Yeah.
And it's sure, maybe I understand that like there is a fair amount of menu diving involved, even though it has no screen. It can get a little frustrating. But I find that, if I just want to change the EQ or what the LFO is assigned to or something, it's actually pretty intuitive.
Yeah.
So I think that there's even if it's not what I would hold up as like the prime example of like the best possible interface, I definitely think there's a lot of good notes that could be taken from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what? If that's not an interface that resonates with your workflow, or if color isn't something that you have an easy time kind of categorizing and working into your melodic aspects, or, it's just a challenge for you to work with it, there's a lot of other ways to interact. Like, you don't need to have a quad drum.
Sure, it's true. And, that's one of the best parts of modular is that there's so many different ways to approach it. And, there has to be some acknowledgement that there are limitations around color, which is that some people literally cannot see color. So I think that there are certain ways to account for that. But, I think that still doesn't mean that you can't utilize it, right? And I see a lot of people out there who have their 301 hooked up to their NerdSeek with all of the teletype, all of that kind of stuff. It's like super under the hood. Mm-hmm. They're really digging into that stuff, but their systems are super small and they love it. I'm like, that's fantastic. It's just not how I want to approach it.
Yeah.
I really like the physical patching. I like to be able to sort of come up with different ways to get all the different things connected to each other. And for me, being able to see it is the real advantage that you have over a computer, aside from, the flexibility in certain ways. The real advantage is like that you're able to see just about everything. And so to me, it's like, I have modules in development that are going to have screens, and I have to think long and hard about like how much I actually want to add to them, because I would rather have a more streamlined interface than have, a billion features that I could just shove in there and have it be another menu option.
Absolutely. It's interesting, you've heard the classic phrase, constraint leads to creativity and all that jazz, but that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I think that module UX and UI design is very personal. And I think the modules that turn out the best are ones that solve very specific problems for the designer themselves.
Yeah.
And it looks like that's what you've been building for yourself. So it's a wonderful ecosystem. And the fact that it has interoperability with the Turing ecosystem, and it just gives people a way to add some complexity to their melodic sequences and to their patches as a whole is great.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to make more modules that do the Turing machine expansion protocol. I have an expander in development for Tree that I'm hoping to release at the same time as Tree. And then, I would like to make a second version of the Vert, but unfortunately right now it all comes down to money. And, it's like, I would like to keep just building whatever I want, but first I have to sell stuff. So, I guess I'm like a little bit cynical about that, but at the same time, it's like, well, without resources, that's just how the modules get made. So, yeah, it's like I have to kind of be like, okay, how much is another expander gonna sell, right? Like, I think it would be useful, but does that mean I can convince other people it would be useful? I don't know. I have people asking me about the video oscillator I've had in development. Every single day it feels like I have somebody ask me. I'm like, does that mean that it's going to sell well? I don't know. It feels like every time I make a module, I'm rolling the dice. So it's a frustrating little nook, right? But I feel like if I can build more hosts and expanders, then the risk of making any specific expander goes down, right? Because hypothetically, leaves right now, it's like I have retailers ask me for it. I'm like, listen, I would love to sell this to you, but I'd rather sell it to you if I had trees in stock.
Yeah,
right.
That makes sense.
And so I wouldn't feel good if these just sat on your shelf, right? So some of them still want it because they either have other modules that it can be sold with, or they have, they're like, there are people in the country that we operate out of that probably have either Turing machines or trees that we can sell this to. And I'm like, okay, as long as you understand the dynamic, that's fine with me. But if I had 3 or 4 modules that all use the Turing machine expansion port, then that would be less of a consideration, right? And they'd all, in my experience, the more of all of the different stuff that I have in stock, the more of everything I sell overall, because somebody comes in to buy an Anna and they go like, you know what? I've seen tree. It looks really cool. I'll add it to my cart, right? Or they hear about one module that gets to come and check out the stuff, and they look at something else and they're like, wow, I never realized that they actually made this. This looks way more interesting than what I was looking for. And so in my experience, the more of the new stuff I release, the more of the older stuff I sell. But that it's a tricky game keeping everything in stock. It takes consistent sales, and I would rather just, sit in my office designing stuff. But it turns out I have to go on Instagram and make videos to sell the stuff.
There's this damn thing called capitalism. We keep having to interact with.
Shucks.
I think that sequential switches aren't the first thing somebody dives into when getting into modular.
It's true.
Right?
It's not. It's so hard to explain what it does to somebody who doesn't already understand it.
Even logic operators and gate manipulation and things like that. That's when somebody's already understood the different types of control voltage signals and has kind of dived a little bit into the ecosystem.
Totally, yeah.
But I think the more education, the wider the ecosystem gets, the more accessible it's going to get. So I do agree with what you're saying. Absolutely.
The funny thing is that I think sequential switches are actually really useful for small systems, because it makes it so that like we were saying about the less is more, it's like you can have one modulation source that's modulating 8 different things. And that makes it so that it's not just, you don't just have an LFO on your cutoff or your pitch the entire time. You only have it there 1/8 of the time, right? Yeah. You could send in a sequence that makes it so that it cycles in and out of your main sequence, and then you have variation. So I think that sequential switches, I think maybe I would benefit from making a video on sequential switch functionality in general, instead of just assuming that people know how to do it. But yeah, I do feel like sequential switches are actually like one of the more useful things that modular synths have over, you don't get a sequential, or like they give the profit from sequential circuit. You don't get like a what do they call that? Like a full keyboard with all of the under the hood patching built with a sequential switch usually. That's something that's very kind of characteristically modular. And I do think that it is a super useful tool. Especially, for me, one of the best parts about Tree is that you can use it with the clock, or you can use it with the shift input, and then you just have like a voltage control of like, I'm selecting between these 2 inputs, or I'm selecting between these 4 inputs or something like that, instead of having to have the entire thing patched up. It gives you a lot of flexibility in that way.
I think that flexibility seems like one of your core design philosophies when I look at the 3D VCA, which seems like an ultimate compact setup when you've got the potential to do mono, stereo, quad.
Yeah, I almost feel like the fact that it's flexible is making it harder to explain to people, because it's like I did my best to make it as versatile as I possibly could. And in that way, there are like lots of little details, like the difference of the input and output normalization, or like the ways in which, there's different curves for different inputs, or like, it's like if you want to turn it into a four quadrant VCA, then you're going to have to use an inverter on 2 of the inputs, like that sort of thing. Made it so that it's like very, very, very flexible. And also it made it so that I couldn't just have like, I have the pan level crossfade labels. Those are all just suggestions. Like in certain patches, the crossfade is actually swapped with the pan because of the normalization pattern. And it's just like, it's a lot. Modular synths are already so hard to understand. And it's like, I'm trying to make these tools that hopefully don't just like replicate something else that already exists. And that makes it so much harder to explain them.
It does.
Yeah. Windows agrees.
Yeah, Windows agrees. New concepts are difficult to explain.
Yeah.
So I guess the last thing I think it'd be fun to talk about is just IDUM and how incredibly well received it is.
Yeah.
And just what a great idea that is. There are a lot of idiots who like to make electronic dance music. I'm probably one of them.
Me too, yeah.
How did you come up with the different algorithms?
I mean, a couple of them were ideas that I had for modules, so I was like, man, it would be cool if I made this module that just like turned stuff into breakbeats or something like that. But I think that I just sort of slowly expanded from ideas that I had for other modules that all got smushed into the same module. And then other ones were kind of like me going like, okay, I already have this concept started. Where can I go from here? Right. So like bouncing ball was not originally part of it. The looper was originally one of the modes in the actual knob. And then I was like, wow, this looper's cool as hell. I wish that it had its own controls. Right. So that became its own function. The breakbeat wasn't originally a part of it, but the clock manipulator was actually one of the big reasons why I wanted to make IDUM, was to be able to mess with clocks on another sequencer. It all came from different places. And ideally, I would really like to make it so that in a future firmware, I have these, these really out there ideas where I would like it so that there was like maybe a web editor and you could like drag and drop like different modes onto
that would be
each.
wild.
Yeah, exactly. I think that would be super cool. And it would also make it really easy for other people to make a mode and then just be like, hey, I made a mode for IDUM. Wouldn't this be, if you want to try it out, you don't have to like recompile everything. You can just drag and drop it with the web editor. But that's obviously really far away because I am bad at computers. So, I can do enough in order to get the program actually running. I'm not positive I can build a web editor. So, I have these like harebrained schemes, and it's all really just it's really just a balance between like how much time I can spend developing and how much time I have to spend building and selling. So I guess that is to say that the more that people buy my stuff, the less time I have to spend on marketing. So, and the more time I can spend on development.
Well, look, we'll work on a little bit of the marketing stuff.
Can you tell I'm kind of resentful about having to actually convince people to buy my stuff? I'm just like, man, I feel like, and that's a tricky thing with selling stuff to musicians. It's like you can have the coolest fucking thing ever made, right? But it doesn't look cool, and so nobody notices it.
Well, this is almost the opposite. I mean, there's a distinct a distinct push if you're not silver and if you're not black.
Turns people off for sure. But I am a stubborn son of a bitch, and so I'm not willing to compromise on it. At least to the extent that I can avoid it.
The irony is the creative variance in Eurorack and how many different approaches, but it's so funny that people are either team silver or team black.
I know. I'm like, there are other colors out there. Especially, it's like, I would understand if my panels looked like shit and everybody wanted them to look like something else. Like I think it's pretty obvious. I've spent a lot of time.
You don't just roll out of bed.
I
kind of puke a design on the.
No, I'm not just like, oh, that looks good. Like I spent some time thinking about what the panels look like. So for somebody to get really kind of like, aggressive about wanting another color, it's very strange to me.
We just finished a kind of a macro photography session, and one of the things you can't tell is that each sub-design inside the panel is different. So hopefully I can overlay and post a couple of photos that really show people the nuance of the design and the complexity of the design.
That actually serves a functional purpose too, which is that if you scratch your panel, it's easier to sort of fade into the texture in the background, and also it reduces the amount of glare that you get from like either looking at or photographing the module. I understand that I put silver on the panel, which is the worst for glare, but that actually the texture of the background, because it's a gloss finish, if you have a texture to the actual thing, some companies use a cross-hatching, which is totally cool, but I was like, hey, I could probably make a unique pattern instead of the cross-hatching. And the first module I did that for was leaves and tree. And then I kind of went out from there. And so it was the actual texture of the panel serves a functional purpose. Besides being its sort of like module identity, it's also like reducing the glare by bouncing the light in different directions instead of just directly into your eye.
So it's more than just an artistic flourish.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Also, all of the text is both outlined in purple, which is the darker color, as well as silver, and the text itself is white, which makes it visible at multiple levels of brightness, right? So not only can you see it in dark settings from the reflection of the silver around it, but you can see it in brighter settings from the actual white.
Literally what we were talking about, these tiniest aspects of design decisions.
Yeah.
No one would think that you paid attention to put a double stroke onto the title of your module so that it was more visible in different light situations.
Yeah, I want these things to be usable, and as such, I think that my eyes aren't what they used to be. I think that making something illegible is you're asking your customers to deal with something that you wouldn't. My philosophy is that I shouldn't ask my customers to deal with something that I'm not happy to deal with.
You don't want to teach them a new cuneiform?
No, that would be silly. I guess Mutable kind of does that, right? They have their symbols that they use. And
they really do
things. That's cool as hell, But I mean, the symbols are somewhat intuitive. Even after, dealing with plats for long enough, I'm like, oh, that kind of looks like an overtone.
So, last subject, I think, since we're on the, the area of really simple, accessible modules, let's talk about Anna 2.
Yeah. So Anna 2 is hopefully, here, I'll move this cable out of the way. I'm hoping that Anna 2 is the only utility I ever have to make.
Let's take it out of that other location also, just because it's still from the angle.
Sure,
right
yeah.
Away.
Yeah.
Perfecto.
So Anna 2, and sort of, I designed it to be like a Swiss Army knife, right? And I'll make it, one of them is green and the other one's red, right? So, Anna was the first module that I designed to be what they call surface mount, which essentially means that 75 to 90% of the robot or of the module is assembled by a robot. And that significantly cuts down on build time. It cuts down on cost of labor. It cuts down on the amount of time that it takes to build these modules. And it's like 100% necessary for mass manufacturing, right? But it's also a whole different way of designing stuff. And so when I designed this first module in this new format, I had a lot to learn, right? And it's been, 5 or 6 years since the module came out. So I was like, over the pandemic, a lot of stuff was requiring new parts and all of that sort of thing. And so I wanted to be able to add new functionality while keeping the design philosophy the same, which is basically you get two signals in. The two signals use the knob in order to either attenuate or offset the signal. And then you get 9 different sort of cross-modulation algorithms out, so to speak.
So this is a logic modulation kind of powerhouse.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's cool because you can put in audio, you can put in gates, you can put in voltage sequences, you can put in modulation, you can put in nothing. And it actually is useful in all of these different kinds of ways. And I tried to make it so that it could be useful for any, you can use it as an attenu-vert offset or as a sample and hold or as a comparator. And it does all of these different things, with a little bit of...
We died.
Shucks.
No, it's all good. Okay. Where did you cut off? You had just been talking about that even you can patch it with no signal.
Yeah, I was talking about how you're able to use it as either a comparator or an attenu-vert offset or a sample and hold, and it all depends on how you patch it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling there's a couple of unique operators in there. Not your standard or XOR AND.
Right. Well, even the XOR you're not going to find that in another module. And the reason that is because I used the diode logic that you normally get behind the min and max. And then you're able to actually use that kind of logic to also create an XOR. So the XOR is a unique wave shaper. With a normal XOR, it's like it sort of acts like a ring mod because you're like multiplying the 2 gates together, right? Okay. So if you have a gate that's on in one of the inputs and a second gate goes on, it flips it to off. So you're able to really easily invert the status of another signal, right? And that's sort of what a multiply does. So in this case, the XOR behaves very similarly to a through zero VCA, where you have 2 positive signals multiplying together and it gives you a positive output, or you have a positive and a negative signal multiplied together and it gives you a negative output. But instead of using attenuation like a normal VCA does, it uses clamping. So it'll just chop off the signal at the top and bottom. That reduces the amplitude until it gets to 0, and then it inverts the signal. Okay. So that's not actually very common
standard behavior.
No, that's not a common wave shaper. And that was actually in the previous version. But then for this new version, I added cut, which was a sort of like extension of that particular concept, where I actually took the diode logic and I pulled it further out. And so cut sort of behaves like if the XOR was a through zero VCA that used clamping. Cut is sort of like a crossfader that uses clamping. And it also does some weird semi-wavefolding stuff. Okay. So it's a completely unique wave shaper that I don't think you'd be able to find anywhere else. And it makes some really beefy tones. I also added a simple mix because that wasn't in there before. So that lets you use Anna as just a normal attenu-vert offset. And with the new multiply inputs for channel 1 and 2, it makes it so that you can take 2 inputs, you can use them through a VCA, and then you can add 2 other signals to it, and you get those out of the mix out, right? Nice. So you can like mix 4 signals together using Anna.
Okay, so IDUM is available and or sold out, depending on where you're headed.
IDUM is currently sold out.
Okay, IDUM completely sold out.
I'm working as hard as I can to get it back in stock.
Trees, sold out.
Yeah.
Leaves, available.
Leaves is available.
Go buy some leaves, people.
Leaves and 3D VCA are available.
Go buy some 3D VCAs, people.
If you want these new modules to come out, I gotta sell the old ones.
All right. Well, I think it feels like Leaves is having a little bit of a resurgence. People finally figured out
I don't know who started talking about it or what, but for some reason people have been buying a bunch of them recently. And it's nice having Leaves and 3D VCA were 2 modules that I focused on as ones that are easy to justify buying more than one, right? Like I use 4 Leaves in my setup most of the time. And
is that a bush?
I've actually considered. No, I know. I've considered referring to the entire system as the canopy system. I have the next expander for this system is called Twig, because bark was already taken, and so was branches. But, seeds, I think, is also taken at this point. But, there are plenty of things. I'll just open a book on trees and keep finding names for it. But, Yeah, Twig is gonna add 2 more channels of sequential switching to Tree.
Oh, yeah.
4 HP, and you're going to be able to chain them, so you're going to be able to have like 16 channels of sequential switching that are all synchronized.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Eli, thanks for explaining some of this to me. I definitely learned a lot about your modules, and you're building such an exciting ecosystem. I think that a lot of musicians are going to be able to use this in some really exciting ways.
Yeehaw.
Yeah, there we go, man. Thank you.